Okay, we're going to look at a poem by Adrienne Rich today. It's from her book, The Dream of a Common Language, poems 1974 to 77. The poem we're going to look at is called Phantasia for Elvira Shatayev. And Adrienne Rich, as I think I said last time, is a poet whose reputation I've known about. She has a very large reputation, of course. She was a great poet, and but I hadn't given her work any sustained attention until about a year ago, when I spent some very rewarding hours with this book. Um, and I read a volume of essays by her, also Essential Essays, which is a roundup of um, essays she wrote at different points and chapters of books she wrote. All of it, almost all of it from a feminist point of view. She was, of course, a forceful and principled feminist. Most of her poetry, as we will see today, also is. And apart from her poetry, I think her nonfiction is uh, very, very well worth reading. Definitely repays the time and effort involved. Um, and I think especially it would hurt nothing if as many dudes as possible uh, read uh, read the writing of Adrienne Rich. So she um, died about in 2012, so that's 13 years ago, and many books of poetry, and so we're going to look at Phantasia for Elvira Shatayev, and I'll read it now. This is about a real event that occurred in 1974. So under the heading, the title, I'm sorry, there's a head note. It says Elvira Shatayev was the leader of a women's climbing team, all of whom died in a storm on Lenin Peak in August of 1974. Later, Shatayev's husband found and buried the bodies. Okay. The cold felt cold until our blood grew colder. Then the wind died down and we slept. If in this sleep I speak, it's with a voice no longer personal. I want to say with voices. When the wind tore our breath from us at last, we had no need of words. For months, for years, each one of us had felt her own yes growing in her, slowly forming as she stood at windows, waited for trains, mended her rucksack, combed her hair. What we were to learn was simply what we had up here, as out of all words, that yes gathered its forces, fused itself, and only just in time to meet a no of no degrees, the black hole sucking the world in. I feel you climbing toward me, your cleated boot soles leaving their geometric bite colossally embossed on microscopic crystals, as when I trailed you in the Caucasus. Now I am further ahead than either of us dreamed anyone would be. I have become the white snow packed like asphalt by the wind. The women I love lightly flung against the mountain, that blue sky, our frozen eyes unribboned through the storm. We could have stitched that blueness together like a quilt. You come, I know this, with your love, your loss, strapped to your body, with your tape recorder, camera, ice pick, against advisement to give us burial in the snow, and in your mind, while my body lies out here flashing like a prism into your eyes. How could you sleep? You climbed here for yourself. We climbed for ourselves. When you have buried us, told your story, ours does not end. We stream into the unfinished, the unbegun, the possible. Every cell's core of heat pulsed out of us into the thin air of the universe. The armature of rock beneath these snows, this mountain, which has taken the imprint of our minds through changes elemental and minute, as those we underwent to bring each other here, choosing ourselves, each other, and this life, whose every breath and grasp and further foothold is somewhere still enacted and continuing. In the diary I wrote, now we are ready, and each of us knows it. I have never loved like this. I have never seen my own forces so taken up and shared and given back. After the long training, the early sieges, we are moving almost effortlessly in our love. In the diary, as the wind began to tear at the tents over us, I wrote, "We know now we have always been in danger, down in our separateness, and now up here together. But till now, we had not touched our strength." In the diary torn from my fingers, I had written, "What does love mean? What does it mean to survive? A cable of blue fire ropes our bodies, burning together in the snow. We will not live to settle for less. We have dreamed of this all of our lives." Okay, I want to say some things about this poem. First, that I find it extremely powerful and moving. And second, that I intend to tread carefully as I talk about it, more carefully than usual, even, simply because, frankly, I'm male, and this poem is so urgently concerned with an experience of women, one that's very deeply felt and complex and not mine. So I'm going into this with a certain amount of anxiety, not a paralyzing one by any means, or I wouldn't be doing this, but one that's there nonetheless. Um, an anxiety over whether I'm entirely equipped to talk reliably about the structure of feeling that animates this poem, because it is so rooted in this experience of being of living within this reigning conceptual framework or discourse, um, the patriarchal one, that is unresponsive to one's full humanity. So I keep rereading and turning this poem over in my mind and reflecting on it, and trying to open myself as much as I can to it. And it's possible that I come to as powerful as I find it. I do come to a point where I have to sort of stand before it in in wonder and in admiration and in this kind of transfixed curiosity about it, because and kind of marvel at this power that I can feel and perceive, but at the same time think that I would feel it much more acutely if I were a woman. Now, I want to be clear about what I mean by that. I'm not saying that I believe that Adrienne Rich is writing only to women. Um, to whatever, to whatever extent it may be true that my life experience as a male has loaded me up with blind spots that might form a barrier to a fuller appreciation of this poem, or make it more difficult for me to appreciate it more fully. The time I've spent with this has been already amply rewarded, and I consider it very well spent. I generally reckon it a good thing for us to encounter human situations and perspectives and stories and so on that we don't fully or don't much at all understand, um, or can't entirely relate to, if or can't at all, if to put it more simply. Um, and that it's far from a bad thing to be reminded that the limits to our understanding and point of view, and the implications of that for our ability to understand and empathize with other people, these limitations can be, crippling at times, and that what we can't, and remember that what we can't conceptually encompass or entirely decipher in the behavior or being of another human being isn't at all evidence of any kind of defectiveness or degeneracy or ridiculousness or whatever in that person. I think that reflection has its own kind of power, and can prod us to a useful and productive moment of introspection, and take us to good places where we can maybe be more open-minded, more sympathetic, and so on. None of us is the measure of all things. So I don't think, as I say, I don't think Adrienne Rich intends for her poems to be read seriously only by women, and I think any vital piece of art, and this is definitely a vital piece of art, in principle addresses itself to the entire world. But I just have to be self-aware as much as I can be as I encounter a poem that attempts to illuminate something that my situation and experience of life may make it hard for me to grasp, and take responsibility for my limitations. So at any rate, this poem is an account of an event, as the head note said. It gave you the bare facts. Uh, this was the first all-women mountaineering company that or party that ascended Lenin's Peak, and was overtaken by a storm, and everyone died. This was in 1974. Back in the good old Soviet Union. That mountain is in Tajikistan now. It has a different name. It's not called Lenin Peak anymore. So a tragedy by the conventional view of things. And I looked at a Time magazine article from that time that was about this event, and I think we can trust Time magazine for to voice the conventional view of just about anything. And it described it as, the quote was, one of the worst disasters in mountaineering history. So I think the poem wants us to hold up there and not be too hasty to call it a tragedy. That it definitely seems the poem definitely, I think, resists that narrative and suggests at the very least that the outcome of the expedition was more complicated. That at the very least, in addition to the tragic dimension, there's something about the experience to celebrate. Something that these women reached, not just this physical eminence together, but perhaps a spiritual peak after this struggle that it suggests began long before any of them even thought of climbing this or any mountain. And that even their dying together there is somehow part of that triumph. So part of me thinks that it's really not seen as a tragedy at all. So again, what strikes me as most interesting is the struggle that takes place within the poem between, on the one hand, the conventional narrative about this episode, and on the other, and for want of a better way of putting it, an alternative narrative that radically recasts it as this kind of exalted moment. It's the struggle of this radically different way of looking at this event. Its attempt to emerge from within the carapace of the dominant conventional narrative and assert a truth that this dominant patriarchal narrative can't accommodate about what happened and what it meant to the women directly concerned. I think the poem wants you to see and reflect on the failure of the patriarchal narrative to make a space to supply a language and conceptual bases for what this event meant to these women, what they are asserting as its fundamental truth, and a truth that runs deeper than that conventional narrative, or maybe the better way of putting it is something that lies irretrievably outside of the narrative, at least as it's presently constituted. And the poem doesn't just say or imply these things; it enacts them. I think it embodies them, and I think you see it from the very beginning in these very interesting kind of counterintuitive formulations you get. The first stanza: "The cold felt cold until our blood grew colder. Then the wind died down and we slept." Of course, that's describing the process of freezing to death. Your body temperature is going to drop, and then you don't feel, before you get organ failure and whatnot, you don't feel cold. I think it's not uncommon for someone freezing to death to start taking off their clothes, for example. But the way that the language that's being used here sort of suggests, a different way of looking at it, as though there's some relief that's been achieved here or granted to the women by um, their their internal essence represented by the blood coming into harmony with the outside, um, the deadly forces outside, and render sort of neutralizing them. There's all kinds of suggestions throughout this poem, I think, of the women identifying with the physical setting in which they died, um, and seeing it. I mean, if I was in a place in a situation like that, and I knew I was going to die there, I was going to freeze to death, I think everything that I looked at would be just saturated with terror um, uh, and a sadness beyond words and so forth. It does not seem to be the case for this woman. The place is part of is an inextricable part of this exalted moment, it seems, and they are identifying with it and coming into a kind of harmony with it. I think that language in that first stanza suggests that. In a way, I almost think that first stanza is the entire sense of the poem is lodged there in this kind of, you know, um, small allegory about what's happening. Their body temperature, of course, went down out there in the freezing cold in the storm, and their blood chilled, and it matched the cold outside, and everything's kind of coming into harmony, and and then they slept, which suggests respite and relief and calm and so forth. Now, the sleep is, of course, their death, and if that wasn't plain in the first stanza, it very quickly is at the beginning of the second one. If in this sleep I speak, it's with a voice no longer personal. I want to say with voices. So this is Elvira Shatayev talking to us from beyond the bourne from which no traveler returns, from beyond the grave. Um, and that's that's the sleep. So then there's another suggestion of a kind of coming into harmony, right? Very, very soon after that. When the wind tore our breath from us at last, we had no need of words. So the process of freezing to death and uh, losing the ability to speak is kind of set at naught, because they're in these women are in this place beyond words, and they don't have any need of speech. So I don't know that it's precisely correct to say that the sense is that they're conquering it or defeating it, because I think the poem kind of rejects formulations like that. I think there's a harmonizing with an identification with the setting, and them valuing this harsh setting in a way, because it's what enabled them to have this exalted moment and feel their strength together. And then she describes this yes that is growing in all of them, each of them separately, and it describes different moments in life, ordinary run-of-the-mill moments in life, mundane moments, in which women would feel some kind of incipient strength, but then it only comes together and realizes itself and comes into full flower when it's those forces are gathered with them all together, and it fused itself, and this yes did that and kind of was intoned before the no of no degrees, the black hole sucking the world in. All right, so and I think there's other suggestions of that in the where she says, "I have become the white snow packed like asphalt by the wind. The women I love like lightly flung against the mountain. That blue sky, our frozen eyes unribboned through the storm. We could have stitched that blueness together like a quilt." So she's saying, coming right out and saying they've become the physical setting. In a way, their women are lightly flung against the mountain like I suppose, natural element in that setting. And the blueness of the sky is something they could have stitched together like a quilt. They're viewing, again, as I say, I would look at anything with, everything would be just dripping with terror uh, and everything that is tied up with my fear of death. But they look at it as almost as though they've created this scene. The blueness could have been something that they stitched together like a quilt. It seems just absolutely inextricably part of this moment, this apotheosis that they're experiencing, and feeling their strength and their full humanity as they haven't been able to before, perhaps. So then the prerogatives of the controlling patriarchal narrative, I suppose, are turn up in the poem. They surface in the poem with the husband. I feel you climbing toward me, your cleated boot soles leaving their geometric bite colossally embossed on microscopic crystals, as when I trailed you in the Caucasus. So that's the relation to nature that's suggested by that language. His relation to nature, or the relation of maybe the male principle to nature, that's suggested by that language is of course very different from what from what was suggested about these women's relationship to nature in the physical setting in which they find themselves. He's scarring it, and he's leaving marks. He's digging into it. There's a bite to the cleats of his boots. They leave a bite that's colossally embossed on microscopic crystals, suggestive of dominance and subduing nature and conquering nature, etc., down to microscopic crystals, down to the smallest units of measurement, that there can be. All of these ideas for which the male principle is somewhat famous, and a great contrast with the way the women orient themselves toward their physical environment, even at this dire moment. But it's not dire for them. It's something much other than that. So he comes with his love, his law strapped to his body, to give us burial in the snow and in your mind. She says a little bit later, you climbed here for yourself. We climbed for ourselves. When you have buried us, told your story, ours does not end. I'll stop there for a second. So he's coming to, and he's not seen as, I don't think, as any kind of evil figure. I think he's coming, he may be very well intentioned and motivated and spurred on by his love for her, his devotion for her, his sense of the fitness of things and whatnot, and to give them burial. And one thinks of what funeral rites and burial, what they are. It's kind of an attempt to take this event, death, and kind of conceptually domesticate it and bring it into some kind of a story about the person who has died, and give people closure. I mean, it's really for the survivors, of course, the dead person being beyond any kind of benefit at that point. But it makes death seem a part of life in a way that comforts us, I suppose, rather than its radical other. It's annulment, it's annihilation, it's all the kinds of terrifying notions that you can let your mind take you to when you think about death. And she insists that it's his story. He's coming for his reason. They're going to be buried in his mind. and she insists that that's not her story. It's his story, not hers. There's no closure for them. There's closure it's a inadequate, incommensurate way of accounting for the reality of their lives and their experience and this event and why they did it. I think, um, and their story, their true story, is not something that's going to fit into some Aristotelian structure with a beginning and a middle and an end. And as I say, a satisfying sense of closure and symmetry and all that and roundness and whatnot. Their story does not end. We stream into the unfinished, the unbegun, the possible, and there aren't terms for it. These unwords, of course, an unword says what something isn't, when in default of being able to say what it is. Excuse me. Um, and let's see if there's any. Yeah. So again, more identification with the environment. Every cell's core of heat pulsed out of us into the thin air of the universe. The armature of rock beneath these snows, this mountain which has taken the imprint of our minds through changes elemental and minute, etc. Um, all right, and then it ends with these three extracts from the diary. These are undoubtedly invented by Rich. And again, this sense of their strength and their power together and what they've achieved and what going there meant to them. We are ready. Each of us knows it. And I've never loved like this. I've never seen my own forces taken up and shared and given back. So there's no regret or anguish about what's about to happen to them, the loss of their lives. And maybe the better way to say this is not, even though they didn't go up there with the intention to die, certainly, maybe rather than losing their lives, maybe a better way to say it is giving their lives in the true sense of that word, or something closer to giving than losing. There seems to be no regret here, and there seems to be this sense of their strength coming into full flower here, and only um, and them losing their lives seems to be part of it. Um, extraordinary. I think it's hard to grasp. It certainly is for me. It's hard to grasp, and it's why I think I see this counter narrative um, that is trying to express something about women's experience that the dominant narrative can't accommodate. Um, so, um, so that's the first extract. The second one, as the wind began to tear the tents over us, we know now we've always been in danger down in our separateness and now appear together, but till now we had not touched our strength. So that's that. I think I've touched on that. And then the what she says before the last extract is, I think, very interesting. In the diary torn from my fingers, I had written, "What does love mean? What does it mean to survive? A cable of blue fire ropes our bodies burning together in the snow. We will not live to settle for less. We have dreamed of this all our lives." So this is the consummation of a dream and not a tragedy. But I think it's interesting, this note, this little note that sounded here before that last extract. In the diary torn from my fingers, I had written, because their story, in a way, will be taken from them. In a way, it won't be theirs anymore. Everything that we've encountered in this poem about what this was to the women involved, none of this is going to get in the Time magazine article. That's for sure. So, how suggestive that is, that she refers to the diary that'll be torn from her fingers, and um, the impediments and the obstacles that are in the way of women being able to tell their own stories and be seen um, in their full humanity, um, even in at this time, and of course, even now. Um, so, in a way, um, maybe that is the tragedy. I mean, this event will be reported to the world in terms antithetical to or incommensurate to those that are meaningful to these women, and and if that's a tragedy, maybe it's somewhat redeemed by Adrienne Rich's empathetic insight about it, um, by which she joins with them and leaves this written trace of their true experience. At any rate, I will read it again, and and I will close it out. Oh, I'm sorry. I do want to make note of a typographical characteristic of this poem and of a number of the poems in this book. And I don't think every one, but it's something that Rich does a lot. She will insert extra spaces between words. Instead as the words as the line goes horizontally, instead of just one space between one word and the one next to it, there might be three or four. So you have all this. Let me see here if you can check it out. There's one here, up here, and these are all through the poem. And I think in this case, it gives the poem a kind of because you're inclined, and as you sub vocalize it in your mind as you're reading it, or if you're reading it out loud, you're inclined to pause there, or at least wonder if you should. I don't think when I read it I really did every time. I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure if I should. But it does sort of give it a halting progression. It does sort of give the continuity some hitches. But it also kind of suggests, just visually, it suggests a space in which maybe something isn't being said, or um, a kind of strangled voice. That something should be there. There's there's some reality that's trying to come in, trying to seep into this, that fills out the picture and repairs the inadequacies of the discourse that we're used to, um, but isn't there, is a blank, is this kind of lacuna, um, and in a sense, visually, it's almost as though our habitual discourse is patriarchal discourse, which none of us really has an option to step outside of, men and women alike, entirely, is kind of she's kind of breaking it apart and trying to uh, open space for something else. I think that's a really interesting thing about this poem, and an element that really goes goes well with the sense of the poem, and is itself an interesting part of the overall experience of it. Um, so I'll just read it again. And okay, Phantasia for Elvira Shatayev. The cold felt cold until our blood grew colder. Then the wind died down and we slept. If in this sleep I speak, it's with a voice no longer personal. I want to say with voices. When the wind tore our breath from us at last, we had no need of words. For months, for years, each one of us had felt her own yes growing in her, slowly forming as she stood at windows, waited for trains, mended her rucksack, combed her hair. What we were to learn was simply what we had up here, as out of all words, that yes gathered its forces, fused itself, and only just in time to meet a no of no degrees, the black hole sucking the world in. I feel you climbing toward me, your cleated boot soles leaving their geometric bite colossally embossed on microscopic crystals, as when I trailed you in the Caucasus. Now I am further ahead than either of us dreamed anyone would be. I have become the white snow packed like asphalt by the wind. The women I love lightly flung against the mountain, that blue sky, our frozen eyes unribboned through the storm. We could have stitched that blueness together like a quilt. You come, I know this, with your love, your loss strapped to your body, with your tape recorder, camera, ice pick, against advisement, to give us burial in the snow and in your mind, while my body lies out here, flashing like a prism into your eyes. How could you sleep? You climbed here for yourself, we climbed for ourselves. When you have buried us, told your story, ours does not end. We stream into the unfinished, the unbegun, the possible, every cell's core of heat, pulsed out of us into the thin air of the universe. The armature of rock beneath these snows, this mountain which has taken the imprint of our minds through changes elemental and minute as those we underwent, to bring each other here, choosing ourselves, each other, and this life, whose every breath and grasp and further foothold is somewhere still enacted and continuing. In the diary I wrote, now we are ready and each of us knows it. I have never loved like this. I have never seen my own forces so taken up and shared and given back. After the long training, the early sieges, we are moving almost effortlessly in our love. In the diary, as the wind began to tear at the tents over us, I wrote, we know now we have always been in danger, down in our separateness, and now up here together. But till now we had not touched our strength. In the diary torn from my fingers, I had written, what does love mean? What does it mean to survive? A cable of blue fire ropes our bodies, burning together in the snow. We will not live to settle for less. We have dreamed of this all of our lives. Adios.